Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles. My name is Henry Bishop, and I was 29 years old when my life completely fell apart. I had been married for 5 years, but we didn't have children and had barely discussed starting a family. Standing at 6 feet and half an inch, weighing 180 pounds, I had blue eyes and prematurely graying hair. People often told me the gray made me look intriguing rather than older. My profession? A bank equipment repair technician, a unique blend of locksmithing and electronic maintenance. My work revolved around fixing drive-through systems, vaults, security cabinets, and occasionally opening safe deposit boxes when customers misplaced their keys. One afternoon, I was wrapping up a job when a storm swept through, knocking out power in the area where I was servicing a bank. The radio announced that repairs wouldn't commence until the storm cleared, which wouldn't be until the next morning. With little else to do, I decided to leave early and head home. I didn't call my wife for several reasons. First, there was no cell coverage in the area due to the storm. Second, I don't use my phone while driving. And third, most importantly, I was angry with her. For months, our relationship had been deteriorating. She'd been nitpicking over the smallest issues, often creating problems where none existed. On top of that, she had used intimacy as a tool for manipulation in the past, and I'd finally had enough. This time, I resolved to confront her with an ultimatum: seek help, or our marriage was over. The drive through the storm was grueling, but once I cleared the worst of it, I made better time. Soon, I was pulling into our driveway. As I approached, I decided against opening the garage door to park inside. I wasn't sure if I'd be staying or packing up to leave for good. Instead, I opted to enter through the kitchen door. To my surprise, it was locked. That struck me as odd. Unlocking the door and stepping inside, I was immediately greeted by a trail of clothes leading out of the kitchen. My stomach churned as dread settled in. This wasn't the homecoming I had anticipated, it was the beginning of a reckoning. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my phone, switching on the video camera. Following the trail, I braced myself for whatever revelation awaited, knowing that my life was about to change forever. Clothes were scattered throughout the house, leading me to the guest bedroom, where I was utterly shocked to find my wife, Clara, with her boss, David, in a compromising situation. The scene was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Clara had always been vocal about her beliefs, often drawing clear lines about what she considered inappropriate or wrong. Yet here she was, shattering every boundary she had ever professed to hold dear. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing to process what I was witnessing. Then Clara's voice pierced the silence, saying words I never thought I would hear from her. "This is only for you, David. Henry won't be part of this, not until I'm sure I'm pregnant with your child. Then we'll let him think he's in control while we carry on behind his back." Her words hit me like a freight train, their weight crashing into me with unrelenting force. It wasn't just the physical betrayal, it was the emotional and mental manipulation that made it unbearable. The person I thought I knew had orchestrated a deception so profound that it left me reeling. As her cries of pleasure filled the room, I knew I had seen and heard enough. Quietly, I raised my phone, capturing everything on video. When David finished, I cleared my throat, breaking their illicit moment. "Don't mind me," I said coolly. "Just here to grab a few things." Both of them froze, their faces turning pale with shock and fear. "I'll be packing up my stuff and moving out." "David, you might want to stay put for a while, I'll need to move my car from blocking the driveway first." As I turned to leave, I added, holding up my phone, "Oh, and this video? It's already uploaded to the cloud. I'm sure your wives and your bosses will appreciate seeing it. You might want to brush up on the company's non-fraternization policy, you've both violated it spectacularly." I walked toward the master bedroom, chuckling darkly over my shoulder. "Carry on," I called out. "I won't interrupt unless I need to." While packing my belongings, the muffled sounds of scrambling and raised voices echoed from the guest room. At first, I ignored it, but the noise escalated into shouting and the unmistakable sound of a slap. Concerned, I returned to investigate and found David crumpled on the floor, clutching his crotch in agony. Clara stood over him, her face flushed with anger, shouting, "Slap me." The chaotic scene before me only solidified what I already knew: this chapter of my life was over, and there was no going back. "Do that again, you son of a," Clara growled, "and I'll kick you harder." I was tempted to intervene, but Clara seemed to have the situation under control. Instead, I decided to take my own measure of revenge. Stepping over David's cowering form, I blew Clara a mock air kiss and turned my attention to David's scattered belongings. Fishing through his pockets, I found his wallet, car keys, and cell phone. I pocketed the phone but removed his credit cards, office access card, driver's license, and family photos, leaving the cash behind just to avoid accusations of theft. Among his things, I found an emergency contact card with his wife's number and home address. Using David's phone, I called her. "Your husband's had a bit of an incident," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "He might have trouble walking for a while. You might want to come get him. Here's my address." She assured me she'd be there in 15 minutes. Next, I gathered David's clothes and stuffed them into a trash bag. Heading to my car, I securely locked the doors before returning inside. I went straight to the home office. After scanning David's driver's license into my computer, I shredded it along with his other cards. I also downloaded a video from my phone insurance and emailed a copy to my work account for backup. Then, I disassembled the office, computer, printer, and Wi-Fi router, packing them carefully into my car. When I returned to the house, Clara tried to block me as I made my way to the master bedroom. She was no match for me physically, so I scooped her up without a word, carried her to the guest room, and set her down. It took 3 trips to pack everything I wanted, all my pants, underwear, and the shirts I cared about. I left only old, worn-out t-shirts behind, nothing David could use. If he was going to stay in my house, he wasn't getting anything of mine to make it easier. As I finished packing, I glanced into the guest room. Clara sat silently on the bed, her expression unreadable. She was crying uncontrollably, babbling apologies, insisting it was all a mistake. But nothing she said mattered anymore. I didn't respond. Instead, I went straight to my gun safe. Methodically, I gathered my weapons, locked them securely in the pistol case, and loaded them into the car. I was done with this. As I was packing the trunk, I noticed David's wife, Isa, pulling up to the house. Without a word, I pointed toward the door and told her to go inside. "David's in the hallway near the bedrooms," I said, giving her all the information she needed. With that, I climbed into my car and drove away. I didn't look back. I headed straight for my hunting cabin, bracing myself for what I hoped would be a long, quiet retreat far from the chaos I had just left behind. First met Clara during a tumultuous time in my life, still reeling from a broken engagement. My ex-fiancé had decided I wasn't wealthy enough for her tastes and quickly moved on to marry a stockbroker. That marriage didn't last long. She soon left him for someone with even deeper pockets. By the time I met Clara, she was already on her 3rd marriage in under 6 years. She hadn't learned from her past mistakes, but neither had I. I was still nursing a wounded heart when I first saw her. It was at an attorney's office, where I had gone to settle my grandfather's estate. Clara worked as a security desk attendant at the building's entrance, and she made an impression on me from the start. It was just before lunchtime when, as I was leaving, I impulsively asked if she'd like to grab a bite to eat. To my surprise and delight, she agreed. That simple lunch turned into much more than I anticipated. Before long, we were entangled in a relationship. Looking back, I can't say I ever stood a chance. Clara had a gift for drawing people in, even when they weren't the right fit. Over that lunch, we exchanged highlights of our lives. Clara, 21 at the time, was attending night school to earn her real estate license. I shared my own story, letting her into a life that, in hindsight, I probably should have kept to myself. I was in town to settle my grandfather's estate, and when I mentioned it, she perked up and asked if I had inherited anything. Her question made my eyebrows rise, so I turned it around and asked if she was rich. That seemed to catch her off guard. She quickly apologized, admitting it was none of her business, and asked me to forgive her for asking. I laughed, apologized as well for my nosy response, and explained that my grandfather had left me his hunting camp along with a piece of otherwise useless property. I didn't mention the money he'd left, as her question about the estate felt a bit inappropriate. Despite that, she was a great conversationalist. She had a knack for putting people at ease and drawing them out with her insightful questions. We got along wonderfully. After I settled the bill, I asked if she'd like to have dinner with me the following weekend. She agreed but teased that I shouldn't go overboard. The dinner went well, and we started dating regularly over the next 2 months. I didn't push for intimacy, as I knew she was still dating others. Eventually, I asked Clara if she wanted to be exclusive. She paused for a moment before saying yes, then asked if that was why I hadn't tried to take things further than some deep kisses. I admitted it was, and about 2 weeks later, we became intimate. It was great, and only got better with time. Our relationship blossomed, and after 5 more months, I proposed. She happily accepted but requested that we wait until she finished her real estate licensing course, which would take about 4 months. I didn't see any issue with that, so I agreed. Eventually, I met Clara's parents, and they turned out to be lovely people. Her father, Miles, was down to earth and confessed he enjoyed a single malt after work, along with fishing, golf, and poker. When I told him I wasn't much of a fisherman but enjoyed boating, hunting, and poker, he laughed and said he'd be happy to take my money at the poker table. I grinned and shot back, "Bring double what you usually do because I don't lose." We both laughed and headed out to the summer porch to have a drink. Got teased again for just having a soft drink, but when I explained that even alcohol in mouthwash made me sick, he backed off. Clara's mother, Margot, though she preferred Marg, was an absolute sweetheart. She was like a slightly shorter version of Clara. Sadly, she passed away from a heart attack just 6 months after our wedding. She was only 46. Clara mourned her mother for about 9 months, but Miles never truly recovered. Eventually, he moved to Florida. We'd hear from him now and then, but we never saw him again after we settled into our house. Once we got settled, Clara found a job as a real estate agent. She needed 2 years of experience before she could qualify as a broker. Honestly, I never quite figured out the difference. After those 2 years, she left her first job for a position at a local office of a national chain. That's where she met David, the office manager. From the moment I shook his hand, I felt the need to count my fingers afterward. He was a slimy scumsucker but undeniably a natural-born salesman. Things between Clara and me didn't start to go south until about 18 months after she began working there. She got promoted to assistant office manager, which came with a small commission percentage from all the agent's sales, a larger commission on her own, and a raise. But I started noticing changes, specifically, that aside from her regular paycheck, none of her extra income was going into our household account. Her wardrobe and jewelry collection became noticeably more expensive, and her spending habits increased. She also started charging business and client entertainment expenses to our household credit card, but I never saw any reimbursement checks to cover those charges. To address it, I canceled all our joint credit cards. I told her that if she needed a card, she should get one in her name only, but I wouldn't co-sign or be listed as a user. Instead, I gave her a debit card without ATM access and explained that I'd reload it as needed, but only if she provided receipts. I also told her that until all her income was deposited into the household account, I'd give her an itemized list of half the monthly expenses for her to cover herself. She didn't pay her share, so I decided not to renew her debit card. That decision went over like a lead balloon. I got the silent treatment for about 3 weeks. Eventually, I presented her with a bill for half of the household expenses. It seemed to hit home. I was serious. From there, we settled into a chill but semi-cordial relationship. However, intimacy was off the table. I reached my breaking point and left for the cabin without telling her. After 2 weeks, she finally called my company's secretary, asking for me to call her back. When I did, she was teary and apologetic about the strain between us. I told her bluntly, if she ever weaponized sex again, it wouldn't matter if she won the biggest lottery prize in history, we were done. To drive the point home, I warned her to check her purse for the credit cards I could still access. When I returned to the house, I made some changes. I took the king-size bed from the master bedroom, put it in the garage rafters, and replaced it with 2 3/4-sized beds. I told Clara that if she refrained from using sex as a weapon or tool for revenge for a year, I would consider replacing the king-size bed, also set up a separate account for any excess income, which she couldn't touch. She started to get angry again, but I stopped her and reminded her of the cabin, now fully set up for me to live in alone. That seemed to quiet her down. About 3 months later, things fell apart for good. I walked into the bedroom to find a situation that made it clear our relationship couldn't be salvaged. I packed up, moved to the cabin, updated my address with my company, and began looking for a divorce lawyer. The divorce went through, though Clara signed under protest. I reminded her of a certain video I still had in my possession. The judge sided with me when he heard the cause of the divorce, granting a 60-40 split in my favor. Clara also owed me approximately $180,000 from commissions she had tried to hide, plus 60% of the proceeds from the sale of the house, or 60% of its greater value. 2 independent appraisals were ordered to determine the selling price of the house in case she wanted to keep it. He made it clear that any appraisal must come from a licensed appraiser unaffiliated with Clara's firm. There were a few companies to choose from, and when the appraisals came back with only a few $100s difference, I told Clara I would accept half of the lower appraisal if she wanted the house. She agreed, and I ended up with just under $325,000 from the sale, plus the hidden funds I had uncovered. Both Clara and David were fired and required to repay any wages they had received for hours they hadn't worked. About a week after I asked Ella to pick up David, he received divorce papers. ISA, it turned out, owned the Office franchise, and David's reputation in town was ruined. No one wanted to cross ISA, especially after she threatened to withdraw her office from the multi-listing service used by most local real estate agents. David eventually left town. Clara was rehired by the company, but only as an agent due to the financial issues. With the money from the house and my inheritance from my grandfather, I decided to quit my service job and pursue my lifelong dream of teaching. Although I didn't have a college degree, I began offering online courses in blacksmithing, locksmithing, and lock security. The income wasn't substantial, but the work brought me immense satisfaction. I also found time to write, which turned out to be very lucrative. Had been living in the cabin for about 2 years when a winter storm knocked out power across several counties. Fortunately, I had prepared the cabin for such events. It was equipped with a standby generator that automatically switched on, a 2-seater snowmobile with a sled for towing, a 4-seater UTV with a small trailer, and an inflatable boat stored in the garage rafters. The cabin was situated well above the 500-year floodplain, and I had stocked enough food to sustain 4 to 6 people for a couple of months. My well was deep and free-flowing, so water wasn't an issue unless the generator failed. I was, however, concerned about both sets of my neighbors, an elderly couple who needed care, as an abandoned granddaughter and a single mother with 2 young children. I found myself stepping into action during the storm. I went to the garage and started up the snowmobile. My first stop was to check on the couple living nearby. Thankfully, they still had power, thanks to their generator. Next, I visited my other neighbors, Janice and her 2 kids. Janice, the mother, was in a state of panic. Her 5-year-old daughter Eva was terrified by the complete darkness in their house, while her 3-year-old son, Miles, was sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos. Offered to take them to my cabin, but Janice hesitated, concerned about imposing on me. After I explained that my cabin had 4 bedrooms and that it was just me and my dog living there, she began to warm to the idea. I assured her it wouldn't be a burden and mentioned that during the last power outage, the electricity had been down for 4 days since our remote road only served 3 families. I also told her about my propane generator, which had enough fuel for at least 3 weeks, that sealed the deal for her. I had brought over a few battery-powered lanterns, giving her enough light to pack a week's worth of clothes for the kids. I advised her to pack extra blankets and winter coats for everyone since the ride back to my cabin would be freezing. I bundled the kids up, securing them safely on the sled with bungee cords. Janice held on to me tightly as we set off. I drove as slowly as possible to keep the wind chill manageable, and after 20 cold minutes, we arrived at my cabin. Once inside, I switched on the lights and settled Janice on the couch. Then, I went back out to bring the kids inside. Eva started giggling with relief when she saw the warm, lit cabin, while Miles, remarkably, slept through the entire ordeal. The storm raged on for 2 days, leaving almost 24 inches of snow in its wake. To keep the kids entertained, I took them on a couple of snowmobile rides. During those quiet days together, Janice and I got to know each other better. She opened up about her circumstances, and we discovered we got along surprisingly well. At 26, Janice had never been married but had been living with her child's father for nearly 7 years. She would have stayed with him, but he became addicted to drugs and squandered all their money for his next fix. Janice gave him an ultimatum: clean up or get out. He left, and Janice moved back to her apartment. For a few months, she worked as a secretary in an office. However, her landlord decided to fix the situation by breaking into their old apartment and starting a violent confrontation. Unfortunately for him, the new resident was a cop, and he shot back. The landlord was severely injured and, after his arrest and trial, sentenced to 12 years in prison. After clearing a path from my cabin to theirs, we discovered that the roof of the apartment had collapsed. The only things that could be salvaged were clothes and some stuffed animals, though they were frozen from the cold. We loaded everything onto the UTV and trailer and returned to my cabin. Janice was devastated, and I pulled her, Isa, and Miles into a group hug, assuring them that they could stay with me for as long as they needed or wanted. I told them that, since they had moved in, I had come to love them as if I were their dad. The 2 ladies hugged me back, and Miles, laughing, called me a funny daddy. I had to leave the room to avoid letting the kids see my tears. Due to the storm damage, they were stuck at my place for the time being. To make matters worse, her boss gave Janice an ultimatum: get to work or lose her job. She tried to explain that she had no way to get to the city, but I took the phone from her and told the boss off. I informed him that she was giving her 5-minute notice because I had just hired her. Janice looked at me like I had a third eye, but I told her to relax. If she wanted her old job, she could easily find another secretarial position. I then explained that I needed someone to transcribe my scribbled notes into readable text and showed her my library of published work, offered her $5,000 per year. She paused, swallowing hard, and asked if I was serious. I assured her that I was. To make my point clear, I showed her the 3 books I was working on at the time. She glanced at my scribbles, then laughed and teased, "Did you write this in Sanskrit? Miles has clearer handwriting than this. You really do need me, don't you?" When spring arrived, Janice wanted to find someone to fix her cabin, though she wasn't sure how she would pay for it. I told her that if she wanted to move, I'd cover the repairs, or they could stay with me and things could continue as they were. I explained that I wanted them to stay because they brought me so much joy and made me feel complete. Janice started crying, and I found myself looking around, wishing I could escape. But before I could move, Jan grabbed me and said, "Yes, yes, yes. You idiot, haven't you figured out that I love you? You've treated me and my kids like royalty and offered us your home. Now, you want us here? Yes, yes, yes." She hugged me tightly and kissed me deeply. I kissed her back, then said, "We need to talk once you settle down," but I mean every word I said. Things went smoothly after that. My writing picked up, with fewer rewrites. Janice was happy, the kids were happy, my publishers were happy, and I was over the moon. Then, one day, I asked Janice to marry me. She hesitated for a long enough time that I felt the need to comment. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought you said you loved me." Don't say no. I won't ask again. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Janice started laughing, crying, and hiccuping all at once. She grabbed me and said, "Oh, you silly man, you just surprised me." Yes, yes, yes. When I hugged her back, I asked, "Do you have a preference for where we get married?" "I don't have a church, and the village judge would be fine with me." She stepped back, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Listen here, you loving man, I'll marry you anywhere, even naked, if it's with you. If we can make it happen tomorrow. I believe that as the people in this little area have been my only friends since I moved here, the village judge would be perfect for me. Let's talk to him in the morning." We went to the village office to get our marriage license, and when the clerk came out, she hugged Janice before taking all the necessary information. The judge asked if next Saturday would work, and my lady replied, "Any day is good, but yesterday would have been better." "Saturday works too." My bride looked beautiful, and Isa was a lovely bridesmaid while Miles was the adorable ring bearer. What made it even more special was when the kids called me daddy. It seemed like the whole village decided we were a good show and showed up to wish us well. Storms bring both good and bad things, as dear listeners can understand. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.